Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the show engineered to really sift through the noise, all the sources, the research, the commentary, and pull out the essential insights for you, our listener. Are you trying to keep up with, everything happening in U.S. politics? Do you feel like there's this constant search for something new, something different from the usual political setup? If you're looking to get a quick but really solid handle on major developments without getting completely swamped by information, you're definitely in the right place. Today, we are jumping right into something that feels potentially huge in the political world. Elon Musk's pretty sudden announcement of the America Party. We've gone through a whole stack of articles, news reports, expert takes to unpack the basic facts, the immediate reactions, and really dig into the potential ripples of this whole thing. Our mission, as always, is to give you that shortcut to being really well informed. We want to understand what's happening and why it's significant without us pushing any particular angle. It's about understanding the dynamics.
Absolutely. And what makes this so interesting, I think, is that it's not just about one billionaire's political ambitions. It's not just his personal project. Instead, it's a really fascinating way to look at how these kinds of big moves, especially from someone with such a massive public profile and frankly enormous resources, how they really challenge the existing political and economic systems. We're looking at political disruption, sure, but also how it tests the whole structure of how politics normally works. And it forces us to think about the future, doesn't it? The future of influence, how campaigns are run, what even makes a political movement viable now.
That really sets the scene. Okay, let's get into it. Let's start at the beginning, the spark, right? The moment this whole thing kicked off. So the announcement itself landed on July 5th. And in a very Elon Musk kind of move, he used X, formerly Twitter, to announce the America Party. His stated reason. He said he believes there's an entrenched one-party system undermining democracy. That phrase itself, entrenched one-party system, that really caught my ear. It suggests something deeper.
It's definitely a loaded phrase.
Yeah.
And strategically so, I think. In the U.S. context, like our sources lay out, it's not literally saying there's only one party, like in some countries. It's tapping into this feeling, this perception some voters have, that maybe the Democrats and Republicans, despite all the fighting, have become kind of similar in how they operate. Reliant on big money, resistant to real change, focused on staying in power. Almost like a duopoly, right? Acting like one big establishment from the viewpoint of people who feel left out or ignored. So Musk using that phrase, it connects with that frustration about gridlock, the lack of real choice, this desire for something fundamentally different. It's questioning the whole future of how the two parties dominate.
And it seems like he got an immediate reaction. There was a user poll he ran right on X after the announcement. Showed something like, 65% in favor of forming the party? Now, obviously, an X poll isn't exactly scientific polling. We get that. But even bearing that in mind, what does that kind of initial reaction tell us? Does it mean anything?
Well, you're right to flag the limitations. It's not a random sample of America, for sure. It's likely skewed towards his followers, people already perhaps inclined to agree with him or just engage with his stuff. But, even with those big caveats, getting that level of positive response, 65% from what's presumably a very large number of users, while it's not nothing, it does suggest there's this strong undercurrent of desire for alternatives, or at least a pretty high level of unhappiness with how things are now. It shows the idea of a new party, especially one led by someone like Musk, who's all about disruption, has real appeal, at least online. It's an early signal, maybe validates his sense that people want change, and could shape how we gauge interest in these things in the future.
An early signal. Okay. And the strategy seems interesting, too. The sources say the initial plan is to target a few key congressional races, and they mention the 2026 midterms as a possible timeline. So why start there? Why not just go straight for a presidential run? What does targeting Congress first tell us about their immediate game plan and maybe their view of the future?
That's actually a really smart strategic question. If you look at how third parties usually fare and the sheer scale of it all, starting with congressional races in, say, 2026 makes a lot more sense. It's more practical, less draining on resources, and maybe more achievable initially. A presidential campaign right out of the gate for a brand new party, that needs a massive national organization, unbelievable amounts of money, and this instant broad appeal that's just incredibly hard to build from zero. It's a huge gamble, usually fails.
Right.
Whereas Congress lets you be more targeted. You can test your message, build up some organizational muscle, find good local candidates in specific districts where maybe you have a shot. It allows you to build that ground game, the volunteers, local connections, talking to voters directly. Get a few wins, even small ones, that you can then use to build momentum for something bigger later on. So it suggests a tactical goal of building credibility, building a base piece by piece, not this huge moonshot right away. It's about showing your viable, disrupting things locally first and maybe shaping the political future that way, district by district. It's definitely playing the long game.
That makes a lot of sense, playing the long game. Okay, so let's pivot to the actual vision. What's the platform? What are the core ideas the American Party is putting forward based on what Musk said and what our sources detail? The main points that keep coming up are strong fiscal conservatism, really focused on cutting the deficit. Then there's modernizing the military, specifically using AI, a big push for deregulation, and interestingly, boosting birth rates. That last one feels a bit different.
Yeah, it is a bit different. And when you look at them together, these points paint a specific picture of the kind of future they envision. Let's maybe break them down quickly. Fiscal conservatism, cutting the deficit. Okay, that's familiar ground for many wanting an alternative. It appeals to people worried about debt, government size, wanting more economic freedom. The challenge, of course, is actually doing it without cutting popular things. Big challenge. But it signals a desire for a different economic future. Then, modernizing the military with AI, you can immediately see the connection to Musk's other companies, right? SpaceX, Tesla, they're deep in AI and tech. It positions the party as very forward-looking on defense. It's not just about weapons, it ties into huge debates about the future of war, autonomous systems, tech advantage. It says technology is key to global power going forward.
Okay, and deregulation.
Deregulation, the argument is always that it spurs growth, innovation, jobs, by cutting red tape. Our sources also implicitly flag the other side. Potential impacts on environment, worker safety, consumer protection. That's always the tension, isn't it? Finding that balance is tough. Any big shift there dramatically shapes the economic and social future, impacting everything from air quality to maybe financial stability.
And the birth rate point, that one really stands out.
It does. It's not a standard political talking point in the U.S., not at the top of the list anyway. Why push it? Well, sources hint it might be about worries over falling birth rates in developed nations. That can lead to economic problems down the line, smaller workforce, labor shortages, trouble funding things like Social Security. So it suggests a very long-term view focusing on the nation's future population, its human capital, and trying to influence birth rates. That touches on really complex stuff, family policy, immigration, economic incentives, even cultural views on family. It signals a deep concern about the country's demographic path and long-term strength.
Okay, let's really unpack this. How do these specific points, especially together, make the American Party different from the Democrats or Republicans, according to the sources? It feels like more than just tweaking the edges.
Yeah, that's a good question. When you look at the whole package, it positions them as a kind of hybrid, doesn't it? Aiming for a specific slice of voters. It's not just Republican-led or a modified Democratic platform. Sure, the fiscal conservatism, the deregulation that echoes parts of the traditional Republican message, appeals to voters worried about spending, wanting more business freedom, but the really strong emphasis on AI in the military, and especially making boosting birth rates a prominent issue, those are quite distinct. They aren't really top-line priorities for either major party right now.
Right, especially the birth rate thing.
Exactly. That's far from standard. It could resonate with people worried about long-term demographics, a topic usually discussed more by academics than politicians on the campaign trail. So the sources suggest that while there's overlap, it's the combination, the emphasis, and maybe this tech-focused lens on some issues that aims to create a unique space. It's trying to attract voters who feel neither existing party really gets these specific, maybe more future-oriented concerns or offers a long-term vision they connect with.
That definitely clarifies their strategy. But as pretty much every expert in our sources says, actually building a national political party is, quote, no small feat. I mean, they make it sound incredibly difficult. Let's talk about the road ahead, the obstacles, the realities.
Yeah, this is where the rubber meets the road, right? The practical side. And the sources are really clear. There are these unique legal hurdles in literally every state. What that means, practically, is just getting your candidates on the ballot is this incredibly complicated, slow, and often really expensive process. Each state has its own rules. California's are different from Texas's, which are different from New York's. You often need to collect tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of signatures from registered voters. And there are usually very strict deadlines.
So it's not just filing some paperwork nationally?
Not at all. It needs a massive state-by-state organization, lawyers who know the specific election laws in each place, and just tons of people on the ground collecting those signatures. It's this fragmented, complex challenge. And you could argue the system is almost designed, whether intentionally or not, to make it hard for newcomers and protect the two big parties. How they navigate this will basically determine the future reach of the American Party.
And the sources really hammer home the scale of it. They say flat out, Even tech moguls like Musk will face years of effort and hundreds of millions to gain ballot access. Years and hundreds of millions. That's staggering, even for him. What does that tell us about the level of commitment needed for this to actually shape the political future?
That phrase, years of effort and hundreds of millions, it tells you this isn't just about having a good idea or a famous leader or even a big starting pot of money. It's fundamentally about building an organization, a sustainable, tough, deeply rooted organization almost everywhere. And even for Musk, that level of spending is serious. It's money and attention that could be going into Tesla or SpaceX. It suggests that the success or even just survival of the America Party depends not just on the initial hype, but on this long-haul strategic commitment that goes way beyond one election cycle. Investing that much signals that the future they're aiming for isn't just winning a few seats in Congress. It's about trying to fundamentally change the political machinery itself. And that's a huge task that really tests the limits of what even immense wealth can achieve against entrenched systems. It's an endurance race, not just about cash.
A serious endurance race. Okay, let's shift gears. Because this announcement didn't just happen quietly. There was an immediate and really sharp reaction from someone who, not long ago, was seen as a Musk ally. Donald Trump. Let's just remind ourselves of that context. People might remember Trump and Musk seemed pretty aligned heading into 2024, and it wasn't just talk. There was serious money involved, over $250 million from Musk and his piece backing Trump. That's a huge amount. It signaled a pretty strong connection at one point.
Oh, absolutely. That $250 million isn't just a donation, it's serious political capital. For a campaign, that kind of money buys a lot. Infrastructure, ads, top strategists, flexibility. So seeing that support potentially withdrawn or redirected, that has real consequences for the 2024 landscape. It forces campaigns to rethink strategy, figure out where else that money comes from. And it's just fascinating, isn't it, how quickly these alliances, even ones seemingly cemented by huge sums of money and maybe shared anti-establishment feelings, can just dissolve. In politics, things change fast. It really highlights how relationships can be transactional, how quickly priorities shift when interests diverge, or maybe loyalty is questioned. It definitely reshapes the future lines of support and opposition.
And Trump's response wasn't subtle, was it? The language was incredibly pointed. Our sources quote him calling Musk a train wreck, saying he's off the rails and calling the party itself ridiculous. Then he warned the America would sow chaos and confusion in the two-party system. Chaos and confusion. It's interesting framing.
It is interesting framing, and it's quite strategic, I think. When Trump uses words like chaos and confusion, he's not just insulting Musk. He's tapping into this very old narrative in American politics. The idea that, look, our two-party system might be messy, but it provides stability. So any third party isn't an alternative. It's a destabilizing force, something that just messes things up. It's a way to try and discredit the newcomer without even engaging with their ideas, just paint them as dangerous to the system itself. It shows how the established parties often react to any challenge that might split votes or weaken their grip, especially thinking about future elections where things might be close. They see fragmentation as a direct threat.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Beyond the name-calling and the chaos warnings, what were the specific policy fights fueling this, according to the sources? It wasn't just theoretical, right? There was real stuff underneath.
No, definitely not just theoretical. The sources point to some very concrete and financially significant disagreements. Trump specifically hit Musk for opposing his big tax and spending bill, the Big Beautiful Bill. And crucially, that bill apparently included rollbacks for EV tax credits. That's a direct hit to Tesla's bottom line, right? A potential cost hit.
Okay, so direct business impact.
Exactly. And then Trump's sort of veiled warning that Musk's subsidies could be at risk. That's classic power politics. It shows how business, politics, and government money are all tangled up. It implies that your political alignment, or lack thereof, could directly affect whether your company gets favorable treatment or funding from the government, especially in areas like EVs or space, which rely heavily on government policy and contracts. It adds a whole layer of political risk to business, shaping the future calculations companies have to make.
And it wasn't just the tax credits. Trump also went after Musk's reported preference for NASA administrator Jared Isaacman. He called it an obvious conflict given Musk's SpaceX interests. What's the significance there?
Well, that taps into another really sensitive area, potential conflicts of interest, when people from private industry move into government roles, especially roles overseeing industries they came from. The sources suggest Trump was flagging Isaacman's ties to SpaceX, a major NASA contractor. The concern, whether justified or not, is that someone with those connections might, consciously or unconsciously, favor their former company or associates over the public interest, or over fair competition for contracts. It highlights that tension. How do you bring in expertise from the private sector, which you need in areas like space, without creating situations where private interests could improperly influence public decisions? It's a constant challenge, and one that will definitely continue to shape future government-industry partnerships.
So this isn't just backroom maneuvering anymore. It's spilling out publicly and hitting the markets. Let's look at those ripple effects, starting with Tesla. The sources show a pretty direct link. Tesla shares dropped, 7.5% the day after Musk announced the party July 7th. That's a noticeable hit.
It is noticeable, but it's also really important, as the sources point out, to see that in context. That drop was happening on top of a bigger slide. Tesla stock was already down maybe 15 to 22% for the year before this announcement. So there were likely already underlying investor concerns about Tesla's position, maybe worries about growing EV competition, market saturation, production issues, or just the broader economy hitting tech and auto stocks.
Right, so the political news wasn't the only factor.
Exactly. It seems like it acted more as an accelerant, or maybe it crystallized existing worries. It added this new layer of uncertainty, the CEO potentially being distracted by a major political venture onto an already somewhat nervous market sentiment about Tesla. It suggests investor confidence might have been a bit shaky already, making this kind of distraction more potent, more costly. It really highlights how a CEO's personal actions and ambitions can directly impact their company's value in today's world, influencing its perceived future.
So what does this mean more broadly for the business world? When you have a CEO this high profile, running a huge public company, diving headfirst into politics like this, what are the implications for how companies are run, for investor confidence, looking ahead to the future?
It really throws a spotlight on that tricky balance, doesn't it? Between a CEO's right to be politically active and their core job running the company for shareholders. Analysts, like the sources mentioned, were openly worrying this political stuff could derail business focus. Daniel Ives at Wedbush actually publicly urged Musk to refocus on his companies. That's pretty blunt language from an analyst.
Yeah, you don't hear that every day.
No, you don't. It's a strong signal that the financial world sees this as potentially harmful to the business itself, its strategy, its execution, its future performance. And then you had Scott Bessent from the Treasury suggesting corporate boards would prefer Musk stick to business, not politics. Taken together, these comments highlight a real tension. While CEOs are citizens with rights, their political activities, especially controversial ones, can be seen as a major distraction, a drain on time and energy, and even a risk to the company's brand or investor confidence. It strongly suggests that investors and boards prioritize stability and focus from leadership. Getting heavily involved in contentious politics looks like an unnecessary risk to the company's future. This whole situation is probably setting precedents for how other leaders might navigate this in the future.
Okay. Beyond the impact on Tesla, let's widen the lens again to those big systemic challenges. There was that guest economist quoted in the sources who had a really stark warning. Something like, even a billionaire's wealth can't override decades of legal and administrative barriers. It will test federal and state systems.
That quote really cuts to the chase, historically speaking. It highlights the immense difficulty any new party faces in the U.S. When we talk about decades of legal and administrative barriers, what does that actually mean? It's this whole complex web of rules and practices that, intentionally or not, really favor the two established parties. We mentioned ballot access laws different in every state, often needing huge numbers of signatures. But it's also campaign finance laws, which tend to benefit those with existing donor networks. It's rules about who gets into presidential debates. It's even how the media tends to cover politics, focusing mostly on the two main players.
So money can't just bulldoze through all that.
Well, money helps, obviously. It pays for lawyers, organizers, ads, but it can't just magically erase these deep-seated rules and procedures. You still have to do the incredibly hard, slow, state-by-state work of meeting those requirements. It's a grind. So the economist's point is that even vast wealth bumps up against these fundamental structural walls. It raises that big question for the future. Can money alone truly build a lasting political force from scratch in America? Or are the existing structures, built up over generations, just too resistant to that kind of rapid top-down disruption? It implies that money might not be enough to fundamentally change the system.
That's a huge question. Okay, let's zoom out one last time to the really big picture, the implications for U.S. politics overall. Musk says he wants to shake up Congress. But given all these hurdles and reactions, the big question for you, our listener, is a party led by a billionaire the answer to political gridlock and frustration?
Yeah, and that question immediately puts this whole thing into historical perspective. America has seen lots of third parties try to break through. Think about Theodore Roosevelt's Bull Moose Party, or Ross Perot's independent runs. Some made noise, some got a lot of votes initially, but very, very few have ever lasted or fundamentally changed the two-party dynamic in the long run. Most just fade away or get absorbed. Our electoral system itself, especially the way we elect people in single-member districts where only the winner gets the seat, naturally pushes things towards two big parties. So it's not just about Musk's goals or his money, it's about fighting against this powerful historical and structural current. Can his approach actually change the future, or will history just repeat?
Still, despite that tough history, the sources do suggest some potential positives if a party like this could gain traction. What were the main pros they outlined? Things like could break the partisan gridlock, force new policy debates, inject accountability. Those sound pretty good to a lot of people.
They do sound appealing, and there's a logic to each one, thinking about the future of governance. Breaking gridlock. The idea is a strong third party could deny either major party a clear majority, forcing them to actually negotiate, maybe moderate their positions to win over third-party supporters or legislators. It could compel compromise, which we see so little of now. That could change the future legislative landscape, forcing new policy debates. Well, a party with unique planks, like the American Party's focus on birth rates or AI in the military, could push those issues onto the national agenda, make the big parties talk about things they might prefer to ignore. That could broaden the conversation, bring fresh ideas into the mix, shaping the future policy direction.
And accountability.
Accountability comes from giving voters a real third choice. If people feel the two main parties aren't listening or delivering, having a viable alternative puts pressure on them. The fear of losing votes to a new competitor could make them more responsive, more focused on actually governing well. In theory, more competition could lead to better representation in the future.
Okay, those are the theoretical upsides. But then there are the cons, the potential downsides, the sources flag, and they sound pretty serious. Likely splits Republican votes, benefits Democrats, repeats historical failures of third parties. Feels like the classic third-party trap.
It really does. And analyzing those cons shows why it's such a trap in the U.S. system. Splitting the vote is the most immediate danger, especially for a party led by someone like Musk, who previously backed Trump. If the America Party pulls votes mainly from people who'd otherwise vote Republican, maybe disgruntled conservatives, libertarians, some independents, without pulling equally from Democrats, it just makes it easier for Democrats to win. Even if the America Party itself doesn't win many seats, it acts as a spoiler. This has happened countless times and directly shapes the future makeup of Congress and state houses.
And the repeating historical failures part.
That ties right back to those structural barriers we talked about. The winner-take-all system, campaign finance laws, media coverage, voter habits, they all stack the deck against newcomers. Third parties might flash brightly for a moment, but they rarely build the lasting power needed to truly compete nationwide over the long term. The sources basically imply that unless the fundamental rules of the game change, which is a whole other massive challenge, the American Party risks ending up like so many others before it, limiting its long-term future impact. It might cause disruption, but not fundamental change.
Despite all that history, all those barriers, there was that political scientist in the sources who suggested Musk's effort might be different somehow, acknowledging that even the libertarians or Greens haven't broken through, but saying, but Musk's reach and resources make this situation uniquely disruptive. What is it about his reach and resources that could potentially change the future for third parties this time?
This is maybe the most fascinating angle, right? Because it connects directly to the future of politics in our digital world. The libertarians, the Greens, they have dedicated followers, clear ideas, but they've struggled for decades against that two-party lock. They lack the scale, the funding, the media amplification to truly compete everywhere. What makes Musk potentially different, as that political scientist points out, is that unique combination of reach and resources. His reach is primarily X. That platform gives him a direct line to tens of millions of people, instantly, globally, bypassing traditional media filters. That's unprecedented power for launching a political movement. He can float ideas, run polls, spread his message with a speed and scale unimaginable to past third parties.
And the resources?
It's not just the sheer amount of money, the hundreds of millions, which he can deploy incredibly quickly. It's also arguably the organizational know-how, the entrepreneurial mindset, maybe even the brand halo from Tesla and SpaceX, even though they're separate companies. This mix, massive direct digital influence influence plus vast flexible funding could potentially disrupt the usual third-party trajectory, maybe allow for faster organizing, more targeted messaging, quicker fundraising than ever before. So it raises this huge question about the future of political power. Can one super wealthy, digitally powerful person actually leverage technology to overcome those historical barriers? Or will the old structures, the inertia of the two-party system, just absorb this challenge too? It's like a massive real-time experiment, and the outcome will tell us a lot about where American democracy might be heading.
Okay, let's really wrap up this deep dive. What we've seen is Elon Musk launching the American Party, aiming squarely at what he calls the entrenched one-party system. Donald Trump fired back immediately, hard, calling it a train wreck, warning about chaos, raising concerns that hit the markets, especially Tesla stock.
So the next, say, 18 to 24 months heading into the 2026 midterms, that feels like the real test. Will this turn out to be serious political reform that actually changes the future of American politics? Or will it end up looking more like, well, a billionaire's very expensive side project?
Exactly. And what we'll be watching, what's so compelling, is what this tells us about the American political system itself. Is it adaptable? Can it handle this kind of disruption? No. Or is it just too rigid? We're basically seeing a live test of whether huge wealth and digital reach can fundamentally alter structures that have been in place for a very long time. The answer will say a lot about the future of political power.
It really will. So the big question for you listening, could the American Party actually gain real traction, become a lasting force? Or is the two-party system just too strong, destined to hold firm like it always has? We really hope this discussion gave you a lot to think about. Consider what stood out most to you, what questions this raises for your own view of our political future. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next time.